On the morning of May 13, 2026, Kouri Richins stepped into a Utah courtroom carrying something she had held onto for more than 3 years. Hope. It was fragile. It was fading. But it was still there. Because until a judge spoke those final words, there remained a possibility that one day she might walk beyond prison walls and return to the life she kept telling herself was not completely lost. Less than an hour later, that possibility disappeared forever. What happened inside that courtroom was not simply the end of a trial. It was the closing chapter of a story that had consumed Utah for years. A story involving a husband found dead in his own bedroom, a wife who claimed innocence, secret affairs, life insurance policies, deleted messages, fentanyl, and 3 children caught in the middle of a nightmare that never seemed to end. The timing made everything feel even heavier. May 13th was not just sentencing day. It was Kouri Richins' birthday. Had he lived, he would have turned 44 years old. Instead of celebrating with his sons, his family sat in silence waiting for a judge to decide whether the woman convicted of killing him would ever have the chance to leave prison. Every person in that courtroom understood the significance of that moment. It was impossible to ignore. The jury had already delivered its verdict nearly 2 months earlier. On March 16th, after only 3 hours of deliberation, jurors returned guilty verdicts on every major charge placed before them. Aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, insurance fraud, forgery. 3 hours was all it took. Years of testimony, evidence, phone records, financial documents, and witness accounts had been reduced to a decision that arrived before most people expected it. Now only one question remained. Would Kouri Richins spend the rest of her life behind bars with the possibility of parole someday? Or would she leave that courtroom sentenced to die in prison? Before the judge answered that question, the people closest to Kouri were given a chance to speak. Family members stood before the court and described the man they lost. They talked about a father devoted to his children, a brother, a man whose future ended inside his own home. Their words painted a picture far different from the legal arguments and courtroom exhibits that had dominated the trial. This was not about evidence anymore. This was about absence. The empty chair at family gatherings. The birthdays that would never be celebrated together. The milestones that would arrive without him. Then came the voices that carried the greatest weight of all. The couple's 3 sons had written statements describing the damage left behind by everything that happened after their father's death. Their words were not read by the children themselves. Others stood in their place and spoke for them. What followed transformed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Every sentence revealed wounds that had not healed. Every statement reminded everyone listening that this case was never only about one death. It was about an entire family that had been shattered. When the time finally came for Kouri Richins to speak, she addressed the court for nearly 40 minutes. She spoke about her children. She spoke about love. She spoke about mistakes she admitted making during her marriage. She spoke directly to the boys who were no longer there beside her. But throughout all of it, one thing never changed. She continued to insist she was innocent. And just moments before the judge announced a decision that would alter the rest of her life, Kouri Richins delivered a message that revealed exactly what she still believed her future would look like. The judge then sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentence had been announced. The cameras had captured their final images. The reporters had already started writing their headlines. But for Kouri Richins, the most important part of the story was only beginning. Courtrooms are designed for decisions. Prisons are designed for consequences. As deputies moved her from the courtroom on May 13, 2026, the world outside continued as normal. Cars moved through Salt Lake City traffic. Families sat down for dinner. Children finished homework. But for Kouri, time had suddenly become something very different. The future she had spent years imagining no longer existed in the form she once believed it would. For nearly 3 years she had lived inside the uncertainty of a criminal case. Trials create strange forms of hope. Even when the evidence appears overwhelming, there is always another hearing, another motion, another witness, another possibility. Sentencing changes that. Sentencing replaces uncertainty with reality. That reality followed her out of the courtroom. For years, Summit County Jail had been her world. The walls were restrictive, but they were temporary. Every inmate inside a county jail understands that eventually something changes. Charges are dismissed. Plea agreements are reached. Trials begin. Sentences are handed down. Jail is a waiting room. Prison is different. By the afternoon of sentencing day, Kouri officially entered the custody of the Utah Department of Corrections. The transition may sound administrative on paper, but for inmates it represents one of the most significant moments of incarceration. The legal battle that dominates every waking thought suddenly gives way to a completely different challenge. Survival inside a system that now expects you to stay. The Utah State Correctional Facility stands on hundreds of acres northwest of Salt Lake City. Opened in 2022, it replaced the aging prison complex that had operated in Draper for decades. Built with modern security systems and extensive surveillance, the facility was designed around control, routine, and long-term confinement. For women entering the system, the first stage involves classification. Every inmate is evaluated. Officials examine criminal history, sentence length, behavioral records, security concerns, institutional risks. The process determines where an inmate lives, how much freedom they receive, and what restrictions follow them through daily life. For someone convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life without parole, classification rarely leads to the least restrictive environment. The process is not emotional. It is procedural. Files are reviewed. Risk assessments are completed. Housing decisions are made. Yet behind every form and every evaluation is a reality impossible to ignore. The life Kouri Richins once knew was no longer waiting outside the gate. The real estate business, the interviews, the public appearances, the routines she once controlled, all of it now existed on the other side of walls she could not leave. That realization does not arrive all at once. It arrives slowly. Sometimes it begins the first night. Sometimes it begins when the cell door closes. Sometimes it begins when an inmate realizes nobody is asking when they are coming home anymore. For Kouri Richins, that realization may have already begun before the transport vehicle ever reached the prison gates. Inside prison, life is measured differently. Outside, people count birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, and milestones. Inside, the calendar often loses its meaning. Days begin to resemble one another until entire weeks seem to disappear without leaving much behind. For Kouri Richins, that adjustment may be one of the most difficult parts of the sentence. The public often imagines prison through television dramas and movies. The reality is usually far less dramatic and far more repetitive. The challenge is not a single terrifying moment. The challenge is thousands of ordinary moments stacked on top of one another for years. Every day begins according to a schedule that does not care how an inmate feels. Lights come on. Counts are conducted. Meals are served. Movement is regulated. Rules govern nearly every part of daily life. The freedom to make simple decisions disappears in ways many people never consider. Choosing when to go outside. Choosing when to eat. Choosing when to be alone. Choosing when to leave a room. These are ordinary freedoms most people barely notice until they are gone. Prison has a way of making people notice. Communication with the outside world remains possible, but it becomes limited and controlled. Phone calls, messages, approved contacts, visitation schedules, and institutional policies all become part of a system designed to regulate interaction. Relationships that once seemed permanent often become difficult to maintain. Distance changes people. Time changes people. In Kouri's case, one relationship stands above all others. Her relationship with her sons. Throughout the trial and sentencing proceedings, she repeatedly spoke about them. She described loving them. She described missing them. She described hoping for a future in which they might eventually reconnect. But hope and reality do not always move in the same direction. The statements presented during sentencing revealed a level of emotional damage that cannot be measured by court documents alone. Those boys were not speaking as legal observers. They were speaking as children trying to understand events that transformed their lives forever. That reality follows everyone involved. It follows the family raising them. It follows the attorneys who represented both sides. And it follows Kouri into prison. There is another factor that makes her situation unusual. She is not entering the system as an unknown inmate. Long before sentencing, her case became national news. Millions of people learned her name. They saw photographs. They watched interviews. They heard details about the investigation. They learned about the children's book she published following Kouri Richins' death. They followed the allegations that eventually led to her conviction. Public attention does not automatically disappear once a prison sentence begins. Stories travel. News reaches correctional facilities. People talk. Inmates talk. Staff members talk. Names become recognizable. For some prisoners, notoriety creates attention they never wanted. For others, it becomes part of their identity inside the institution. Either way, it changes the experience. The first weeks after arrival are often the hardest. Orientation procedures begin. New routines take shape. Uncertainty gives way to structure. And little by little, inmates begin to understand that the sentence announced in court was not the end of the process. It was the beginning. The courtroom determined how long Kouri Richins would remain behind bars. Prison is where she now has to live with that answer every single day. There is one part of a life without parole sentence that rarely appears in headlines. It is not the courtroom. It is not the verdict. It is not even the prison itself. It is the absence of an ending. Most inmates live with some version of a future date. It may be years away. It may be decades away. But somewhere in the distance exists a possibility of release. Parole hearing. A review. A chance to stand before a board and argue for another opportunity. That possibility changes how people think. Creates goals. Creates timelines. Creates hope. For Kouri Richins, the judge removed that possibility on May 13, 2026. Life without parole means exactly what it sounds like. No scheduled release. No parole board approval. No future hearing designed to determine whether freedom should be restored. The sentence continues unless something extraordinary changes through the legal system. Her attorneys have already announced plans to appeal. That process could take years. Appellate courts may review legal arguments, trial procedures, evidentiary rulings, and other issues raised by the defense. Appeals are a normal part of major criminal cases. But appeals move slowly. Months become years. Years become more years. And during that time, the original sentence remains in effect. Every morning begins the same way. Every evening ends the same way. The appeal exists in the background while daily prison life continues in the foreground. That is the reality many people misunderstand. An appeal is not a pause button. It is not a suspension of punishment. The sentence starts immediately. For Kouri, that means every day spent inside prison is a day already being served. Yet there is another story running alongside hers. A quieter story. A more important story. The story of 3 boys. Public attention naturally focuses on defendants. Cameras follow court appearances. Reporters analyze testimony. Experts debate evidence. But long after the coverage fades, families continue living with the consequences. Kouri Richins died on March 4, 2022. That loss alone would have changed his children's lives forever. Then came the investigation. Then came the arrest. Then came the trial. Then came the conviction. And finally came the sentence. Each stage created another moment of separation. Another moment of change. Another reminder that life would never return to what it once was. The statements presented during sentencing offered a rare glimpse into that reality. They were not legal arguments. They were not strategies designed to influence public opinion. They were reflections of pain from children forced to navigate circumstances most people cannot imagine. That may be the most lasting part of this entire case. Not the evidence. Not the verdict. Not even the sentence itself. But the impact left behind. Today, Kouri Richins remains inside Utah's prison system serving life without the possibility of parole. Her legal team continues to fight. Her supporters continue to believe in her innocence. Eric Richins' family continues trying to move forward. And somewhere beyond the courtroom arguments and prison walls are three boys growing up in a world permanently shaped by what happened. The judge's decision closed one chapter. It did not close the story, because for everyone connected to this case, the consequences of that day are still unfolding. And they may continue unfolding for the rest of their lives. As of today, Kouri Richins remains inside Utah's prison system, serving a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. The appeals process is moving forward. The judge acknowledged during sentencing that no one can truly know how those three boys will view this case decades from now. Time changes people. It changes memories. It changes perspectives. But he also made clear that his responsibility was not to predict the future. His responsibility was to evaluate the evidence placed before the court and make a decision based on the facts. Kouri Richins still believes she will walk free someday. The sentence says otherwise. And for three children whose lives were permanently divided into a before and after, that question may continue long after the headlines disappear. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true crime stories every day.